pianist Boris Giltburg won first prize at the Queen Elisabeth Competition in Brussels last year. He's also been nominated for a Classic Brit Award, as well as many other accolades, so I'm thrilled he's taken the time from a very busy schedule to join me here today at Jaques Samuel Pianos in London for a classical conversation. Welcome.
Hello, Melanie.
Lovely to be chatting to you today.
Thank you, my pleasure.
I'm going to start by asking you about your education. I always start by asking what age you started, why you started, whether you come from a musical family.
I do. My mum, my grandma and my great-grandmother were pianists and piano teachers, and we always had a piano at home, so for me it seemed absolutely obvious that I should play. Whereas to my mum it seemed that I perhaps should be doing something more practical, and she was quite against the idea that I play the piano. So I, as every 5 years old, was denying something, really wanted it, and insisted till the point where she relented and started giving me lessons. And that's how it started. It was still in Moscow before we moved to Israel.
Okay.
And the rest of my education, my main part of the education was in Israel. My big one teacher, the one teacher of my life, is Ari Vardi, an Israeli.
That's what I was going to say. Which teacher do you think was most crucial?
Well, I would say both mom and him, because I studied with him for 15 years almost. So it's a long time, and almost everything I think and do in what concerns sound, approach to style, to the musical text, to phrasing, to almost everything in musical interpretation is via the prism of what he taught me and what I observed from him. But I know that from my mom's point of view, I can rely on her 100% every time. She's not at all oh, this is lovely kind of mom. She's a very strict critic, and I know that if something is bad, she would always tell me.
So how did you develop your technique over the years?
Well,
did you used to practice sections in pieces, or would you practice studies?
No, I hated studies, scales, all of that. Because most every piece of classical music is full of scales and study-like passages. So, whereas if you do just the studies, they're sometimes boring technical exercises. If you do them inside a musical work, then the technical part becomes just one variable of the entire thing. And in good music, it's always that the technique is in service of a higher musical aim of some sorts.
Sure.
And when you work on a piece of music and you want to get a certain musical result, then the technical challenge becomes, it's not annoying, it's not an obstacle, it's something which you want to overcome and integrate inside the interpretation to get to the musical result you'd like to get. So it's easier to solve problems in Liszt's piano sonata than in some of Czerny's etudes.
And more enjoyable too.
Yes, much more so.
You won the Queen Elisabeth Prize. This must have had a huge impact on your career. How has it changed and shaped it, do you think?
It gave a very big push.
Yes.
There was a very big list of engagements right after the competition. Not only that, but the prestige of the Queen Elisabeth. This is one of the reasons why I wanted so much to participate. Many of my biggest musical heroes have won it in the past, including Gilles and Oistrakh and Ashkenazi. So to have won this, and this is probably the last one. Well, not probably. This is definitely the last competition I'm going to take part in.
Well, that was kind of my next question. How do you feel about competitions generally? Because you've taken part in quite a few. So.
Yes, many more when I was a small kid. In the last 10 years, just 3. I won Santander in Spain in 2002. Then I took part in Rubinstein competition in Tel Aviv in 2011 and got the second prize. And then Brussels last year. And I think when you're a small kid, it's just sheer fun.
Yes.
You have nothing to fear, nothing to lose. The older you become, the more heavy the responsibility when going to a competition.
Of course.
and I think I'm extremely happy to be able to end my competition career on this note with this prize at this competition.
Sure. Which composers do you love to play?
I'm omnivorous, so almost everything, but two big groups from which I almost always draw works for recitals are the Germans and the Russians. A lot of variety inside each group, from Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Schumann, Schubert, Mozart and so on. German and Rachmaninoff, Prokofiev, Tchaikovsky, Mussorgsky, Scriabin, Shostakovich, so on in the Russians. The Russians I think are easier to explain because even though I grew up in Israel, I'm still very much a Russian person inside, or more exactly to say it, Russian culture, Russian language, Russian literature, poetry, and music are extremely close to my heart. The Germans, well, I just love them.
You like them all?
No logical explanation. They just appeal to my imagination, to both my heart and head. So.
You've recorded the late Prokofiev sonatas, the war sonatas. To great acclaim. What attracts you to this music?
The war sonatas. Prokofiev in general is a master storyteller. He, even in his early works, within a few bars he weaves an entire world around you and then places the music as a story told within this world. And this is something which I find extremely attractive. It appeals to your imagination in a very direct way. He's also sometimes very visual, like a good filmmaker. He knows how to mix close-up scenes with wide-angle shots, so to take you into the heat of action or take you out and show you the larger perspective. His harmonic language is quirky, fun, and very spiky in a good kind of way. He adds bad notes, and somehow it all sounds right and ends right.
I feel it suits your articulation, which is absolutely fantastic. If I might say.
From a technical point of view, I find that his way of writing suits my hands like no other composer. I know maybe his hands were somewhat similar, but for example, Rachmaninoff, whom I love just as much, technically is much more difficult for my hands. Whereas Prokofiev, the music just seems to sit very comfortably in the fingers. The articulation, as you said, this kind of thing.
Yes.
I was just working on just now two Rachmaninoff concerti on the second and Rhapsody on the theme by Paganini. I was thinking how much easier I find the Rhapsody, where the technical approach is closer in some ways to Prokofiev.
I was going to say that. Yes, it is, isn't it?
So less heavy blocks of chords and more. I wouldn't say exactly percussive, but more single line voices. Shifts between hands and more clarity and transparency. I think that Prokofiev, in some ways, even in his most thick texture, he's a neoclassicist of some degree, to a certain degree, and he always retains a transparency which one would expect to find rather in Beethoven or Mozart or Haydn. Imitating whom he wrote the classical symphony.
Yes.
That he wants to write something which I might have written if he lived at that time. And the way his music, whereas Rachmaninoff is extremely visceral and he goes directly into your heart, Prokofiev, playing his second piano concerto, for example, it's like reading a great novel by Kafka or Bulgakov. And the war sonatas, which you asked me about, they're of course knowing the circumstances in which the music was written. So not only the invasion of Russia by Hitler and the Second World War, but also the terror within Russia. It was just after the great purges of Stalin in 37-38, in which nearly 2 million people were made to disappear without trace, and Prokofiev himself lost many friends and people he knew. And the combination of those things, the terror within and the terror without, they lead to 3 works which are, it's like a chronicle of the time, and I think it's a masterpiece even by his standards, and something we should never surpass in his other works for piano. There is a kind of, especially in the 8th, the way he manages to reach some sort of objectivity. So in the 6th, for example, it's very much inside the action. You begin the sonata and it's the enemy is marching towards you, blank, dead eyes, and there is no objectivity at all there. The 7th, for me, is more about the terror within, which I told you, so Stalin's kind of terror, and the famous finale, which Richter thought was the triumph of humanity over all obstacles, but it could just as easily signify or depict the triumph of a well-oiled machine over everything, including that spirit of humanity just tramples everything in its path to glory and victory. But in the 8th, he manages to surpass even those two and reach some altitude of all of his energy and quirkiness is still there, but there is also wisdom and objectivity, as I said. And the tapestry which he creates, especially in the first movement, I think it's a masterpiece, a work of art of any time and period and epoch and medium. So playing it is a big privilege and a very special experience.
And do you plan to record all the sonatas, the whole Prokofiev project?
Well, after the Prokofiev, I recorded some romantic sonatas, and my last CD, which I've just recorded last week, and will be released in the winter, is Schumann. As for more Prokofiev, maybe the concerti. About the rest of the sonatas, I love very much number 4. I like very much number 2 and 3. 1, 5 and 9, I'm at the moment I still find a bit harder to understand. Well, 5 specifically, it's a very obscure work for me. 9 is lovely, it's a bit weaker I find than the others. And 1 is just a very early work, so sometimes not easy to sense the essence of Prokofiev in it. But I think that even those 3 sonatas, just on their own, if Prokofiev left nothing else, they would be a testimony of a very great artist.
Do you have a particular practice regime?
Not really.
Not really. I read somewhere you practice on a silent piano.
Yes and no. The grand piano which I have at home has a silent piano on it, so if I need to practice,
this
is a lifesaver, and it acted as a lifesaver a few times. But this is just for emergency. For a normal kind of work, you must have the real response of a real keyboard with a real sound. One thing which I do is I record myself quite a lot and listen to the right way. So, because often it's hard when playing to hear the larger line, to hear the movement or the work in its entirety, and also many things which you do not notice when you are at the keyboard. Suddenly, when heard from distance, they suddenly they're very prominent. So this is something which is part of the daily and other than that, it's just practicing, just working as much as possible. The material we're working with is so rich, is inexhaustibly rich. It's like a mine which you can never reach the bottom of. And those works, they grow with you, so if you come back to a piece you've played 5 or 6 years ago or 10 years ago, and if it's work by one of the great composers, you'll usually find that there's more to discover, more layers to bring up, and this makes the everyday practice not really work, but a journey of discovery. So it can be sometimes frustrating when you are unable to do something you want to, and sometimes you don't know why, you don't know what you need to change in order to get there. But still, I think that the positive points overcome the landslide of all the others.
What are your future plans? Concerts, recordings?
Well, for recordings after the Schumannist, the next CD is probably going to be Beethoven sonatas. For concerts, next season is fully packed. Many things in Europe, many things in Far East, many things in South America, a few things in the States. I'm playing for the first time with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra in Marin also. Japan, China, and many things in Israel too. It's my home country, and it's an exciting time.
Sure, of course. What does playing the piano mean to you?
It's my life. That's one of the best things I know of. This is one of the main things that drive me forward, that makes me want to go and do things. Because my main way of doing things is by playing them. It's just I wouldn't say it's about expressing myself, not at all. It's about reaching some kind of musical truth in the piece. And this truth might change with time, but for tonight, there is something which you know that is there in the piece. And when you are able to reach it and to show it or play it for the audience, this feeling is incomparable. So I wouldn't be able to do this without playing the piano. So, and I also love playing the piano because it's a hands-on experience, as opposed, for example, to conducting, where you need to make other people do the music. If you want to, I imagine it's even more complicated. But for me, just the physical sensation of doing it with my own hands, with my own body, this is also a big part of the fun. And yeah, I think so.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Boris.
My pleasure.
Thank you.